Welcome back. Estate planning is one of the most overlooked elements of financial planning in South Africa. According to the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, around 70% of South Africans die without a valid will every year, despite having life insurance or pension cover. A recent case, of course, involving the late former Deputy President David Mabuza, whose 44.7 million rand pension was frozen by the High Court in Mpumalanga, also highlights the real risks of poor estate planning and outdated beneficiary nominations. So let's try and understand how it all works. Joining us now is the CEO of Momentum Trust and Fiduciary, Jeffery Wiseman. Thanks very much for your time. It's good to talk to you. This is such an important issue, isn't it? I mean, the issue of wills, I would say, perhaps was highlighted during COVID-19. I think that's when a lot of people realized the importance of having a will. I would say many of us didn't even consider it before then. Has that picture changed since then?
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for the opportunity to join you this morning. Yes, as you pointed out in the beginning, about 7 out of 10 people don't have a will, and it's such an important document. COVID was certainly a catalyst, and we saw a big increase in the numbers of wills. But I think what tends to happen is that as things normalize, people tend to go back to life as usual, and they forget about the importance of it. I think perhaps the most important thing to point out is that getting a will and putting a will in place is not that difficult, and wills are really quite easily accessible in South Africa.
So when we talk about estate planning, a will is just one part of that, right? Help us understand about the broader term of estate planning.
So estate planning means different things for different people. I think many people feel that they perhaps don't qualify for estate planning, but for most people, I think estate planning is probably the process of making sure that you have a will that is appropriate to your circumstances. And certainly in our experience, one of the areas where many people fall short is that they don't make sure that there's enough cash in the estate to make sure that there's money to settle costs and also liabilities. That if there isn't enough money in the estate, it really makes the administration process quite complex, and it can be a difficult experience for family members who stand to inherit from the deceased.
And how is South Africa doing compared to other emerging markets? You said at the start that 7 out of 10 people in South Africa die without a will.
So in that sense, estate planning is actually quite a complex topic. In South Africa, we've done quite well on certain things. So our legislation in relation to the recognition of marriages and broadening the definition of spouse has been quite kept well up to date. Different countries have different succession laws, so it's difficult to make a direct comparison. Some countries, the role of a will is perhaps less significant because the law determines who should inherit what. Where I think South Africa is perhaps a little behind is that our estate administration framework, so our Administration of Estates Act, which is the legislation that determines how estates must be administered in South Africa, that act is 60 years old this year. So it's old legislation, and perhaps in that sense, our master's offices and the legislative framework that they use to provide for the administration of estates is perhaps slightly outdated.
Yeah, slightly, by 6 decades. The issue that you raised earlier about there not being enough money in an estate potentially to cover any shortfalls once someone has died. That's when it comes to broader financial planning. So having insurance on a credit card, making sure that you have insurance on your bond. These are the kind of important things that come to play, because obviously whatever is in the estate, if those things are not insured, what is in the estate will be used to cover the debt that is left behind.
That's exactly right. And so the executor could be faced with the difficult decision of having to sell the family home in order to settle these debts and costs. And I think many people underestimate what these costs and liabilities can be. And that's where I think estate planning or financial planning is such an important thing for many people, for everyone really, just to undergo as a process. It's so important to speak to a financial advisor and try and understand what your circumstances will look like if you were to pass away.
Absolutely. So you've mentioned this already, Jeffery, but I want to just talk through it again. The different laws that govern different elements of someone's estate, someone's legacy, effectively. Talk us through the rules that govern a life policy and then versus the rules that govern something like a pension fund. What's some of the planning that's required there?
So I think it's important to look at perhaps three categories. So there would be your personal estate. Those are the assets that are dealt with in terms of your will. But when it comes to life insurance policies, you have an opportunity to nominate a beneficiary. That person receives those proceeds directly from the insurer, and the person that you nominate will receive those proceeds independently of your estate. So the executor won't deal with those policy proceeds. Pension funds are quite unique because the trustees of the pension fund need to make a decision as to how to distribute the pension fund assets that you have. You will be allowed to nominate people that you would like to receive those benefits, but ultimately the trustees look at who your dependents were before you died, and they make a decision to allocate those benefits based on the need that they see in information that is submitted to them as part of the claims process.
So any dependents, whether they are listed in your will or not, but for example, if it can be proven that you were sending money to person A, person B, person C regularly over a period of time, those are the things that pension fund administrators will look at.
That's right. So the Pension Funds Act actually talks about legal and factual dependents. So a legal dependent might be a child or somebody who you have a legal obligation to support, but a factual dependent would be the type of scenario that you were describing now, where a person was being supported by you, in fact, and the pension fund trustees do look at those types of dependents as well in making a determination.
There's an option as well, Jeffrey, around setting up a trust for your family. So there's the option of having a will, and obviously you decide where your assets will be divided at the time of your death. How does the setting up of a trust perhaps help protect assets in the event of someone's death?
Yes, so estate planning trust, trusts are a very important estate planning tool. And most people in setting up a will, if you do have minor children and they stand to inherit from your estate, you would normally be advised to include a testamentary trust to receive those benefits for the benefit of those minor children in your will. So that's the one type of trust. Then you get your estate planning trusts that your wealthier individuals use to plan their estates, and those are still a very effective estate planning tool that can be used to provide for succession, but normally associated with quite complex advice. So certainly, as I say, as a starting point, a testamentary trust to receive benefits for minor children or disabled heirs is certainly something that everybody should consider including in their will. It's
complicated, isn't it? In a way. I mean, it can be complicated. And perhaps people don't have access to the tools that's needed to try and make sure that things are in order and that your assets are divided according to your wishes at the time of your death. For those of us who don't have access to something like a financial advisor, we maybe don't even have the time, or we don't think we have the assets that even needs to get the advice of a financial advisor. What do you suggest? Where can we go when we don't have access to financial advice?
Well, I think the first thing is that I think financial advisors are perhaps more easily accessible than many people will think, and I think the biggest mistake that people make is to think that they don't have enough to consult a financial advisor. I think everybody should make an effort to do that. If you really want to go it alone, there are self-help options that are available. I don't think estate planning needs to be complex for everybody. I think for me, if you have a will that is appropriate to your circumstances, it doesn't need to be a complex will. And then make sure that you understand what your costs and liabilities are going to do when you pass away. If you do those two things, marry them together and make sure that they speak to one another, that's a very good start and places you in a much better position than the majority of South Africans. Yeah.
So part of our introduction to the story was, of course, what's unfolding in the courts now with the former late Deputy President David Mabuza and his 44.7 million rand pension. So as we are told, he died without a will, so he died intestate. There are many, many complications around that, Jeffrey, not least of which the emotional burden that places on a family at a time when you really should be focused on grieving the loss of a loved one. What happens in a case like this? And it is still in the country's courts, but what are some of the scenarios here?
So I think David Mabuza's situation is an interesting one in the sense that if he died intestate, then obviously his estate will need to be divided according to the laws of intestate succession. So we have an Intestate Succession Act that tells us how to divide assets if somebody dies without a will. The interesting thing, though, is that in his case, the argument seems to be more about a pension fund benefit, and that really is dealt with in terms of the Pension Funds Act that we spoke about earlier, rather than in terms of his will. I think the point that you make that is particularly valid, though, is that if a person does die without a will and there hasn't been planning that has taken place, it definitely raises the tension, and it really can create a lot of unhappiness and confusion for those people that are left behind.
Yeah. So in terms of the way that it's not just about how his estate will be divided up, but to the point that you made about the difference between how money is divided after the death of someone. There are different rules governing different portions of money, right? So it'd be different rules that govern how his pension is divided.
That's right. So the Intestate Succession Act will talk about the assets that fall into his personal estate, but his pension assets fall outside, and then the pension fund trustees are the people that are looking for those legal and factual dependents to decide who should receive benefits from the pension fund and how much each of them should receive.
It's difficult as well in his case because of some contestation around who he was legally married to at the time of his death. That adds another layer, doesn't it?
It does. So we do have the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act that broadens the definition of marriage in South Africa, but it certainly, as I say, it does create opportunities to recognize more people, but it doesn't necessarily simplify the situation as it applies to particular individuals.